Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Albert Chiu. The Pacific Island nations have long been a focal point in the strategic competition between China and the U.S. At the end of November, Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te set off on a visit to 3 of Taiwan's 12 diplomatic allies, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, and the Republic of Palau. President Lai's itinerary also included transit through Hawaii and Guam in the U.S. This marks President Lai's first overseas trip since taking office, drawing significant international attention. Joining us today are Leonard Zhao, National Tsinghua University adjunct professor, and Jasmine Lee, U.S. Taiwan Watch co-editor. A very warm welcome to both on the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So what strategic significance does President Lai's first overseas visit to Taiwan's allies in the South Pacific, the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu and Palau highlights? Ambassador Zhao.
Well, okay, as we all know that the number of our diplomatic allies, is only 12 in the world. So numerically speaking, okay, 3 out of 12, the island countries, they're all our allies. I think the significance, the importance is self-explanatory, because without saying that, we have to, I think the head of state's visit will certainly strengthen, consolidate our diplomatic strongholds in the Pacific area region. So I think this goes without saying that we have to do that. And secondly, I think the President Lai assumed, since his presidency, he had to pay a visit overseas, like all of his predecessors did. And now this time, he normally, I think we like to visit the most available, most accessible diplomatic allies country. Normally, in the past, we visited some of the Latin American countries, but this time around, I think South Pacific Island deserved our attention. I think time is ripe for him to pay a visit. So I think the relationship definitely will be consolidated and can strengthen by President Lai's visit.
Mm-hmm. Jasmine, I actually have another question for you. During President Tsai's recent visit, he not only successfully transited through Hawaii, but also delivered an 8-minute closed-door speech at a U.S. think tank. The speech title was A Shared Future, emphasizing Taiwan as a partner for peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. So Jasmine, compared to the past visit by Taiwanese presidents, do you see any difference in this time around the visit, Lai's visit?
I think that this time is definitely a very special moment, especially we're seeing an upcoming new U.S. president coming up. So I would say I'm actually really impressed by the itinerary, especially we can deliver, President Lai can deliver this talks at the East-West Center, the think tank, and also he not only went to the think tank, but he also went to the USS, the Arizona Memorial, and went to the emergency management site. So I think these are all very important, also all send out a signal that the strong relations between Taiwan and U.S., especially now the priority and the most important goals between U.S. and Taiwan is to build this resilience. And I want to mention one thing is that we're now in the future administration with President-elect Donald Trump to be in the White House. We're actually hoping that U.S.-Taiwan relations can be as low-key as possible. We're hoping that Taiwan issue can be out of President Donald Trump's radar. We are hoping letting his State Department officials or his Secretary of the State to manage Taiwan issue. So I think this trip, actually the itinerary and the agenda setting was really, really good. You're not raising the radar too much, but at the same time, you still send out a good signal to strengthening U.S. and Taiwan relations.
So Ambassador Zhao, do you agree with Jasmine's notion that you think this trip is low-key?
Yeah, well, if I may add up something to what Jasmine just said, that the content of President Lai's speech at the East-West Center, he mentioned about the so-called 4-pillar action plan, which is very timely, very opportune, in response to to Donald Trump's recent comments on Taiwan.
What are those 4 pillars?
Okay, the 4 pillars consist of the global supply chain. Global supply chain is very important. We'd like to make some contributions to the global supply chain. And the other one is working to ensure peace, stability, and prosperity in the Taiwan Strait, as well as the Indo-Pacific region. So given the context that Donald Trump, the President-elect Trump, recently came out with some certain comments on Taiwan. Well, honestly speaking, that is not necessarily very positive, not very encouraging. But I think this moment, so President Lai's speech, it's kind of serving as a response to President-elect Trump's comment, because meaning that Taiwan would like to help U.S. in some global supply chains arrangement, and also Taiwan standing as a complementary and to the U.S. interest. So I think this is a better moment to respond to Trump. In other words, I think we'd like to hidden message is that tell Trump that please you can stop any possible negative comment on Taiwan. We are your friends, and we remain as your friends.
Okay, newly re-elected Palauan President Serengo Whips Jr. is well known for his steadfast support of Taiwan. So what are the main reasons behind the strong and enduring relationship between Taiwan and Palau? Jasmine?
I would say, of course, Palau has been one of the strong diplomatic allies of Taiwan, and I think it's also very important. As we mentioned a little bit earlier, I think we all understand the elephant in the room is China. China has been expanding its influence in the Pacific region, and especially in 2022, they have after Taiwan cutting ties with Solomon's Island, they have some security-related agreement signed with Solomon Islands. So we know that they are extending their influence. So strengthening our relations with the island country in the region is extremely important. And for Taiwan and Palau, we have the long relations, especially building on travels and the travel industry. So I would say we have to continue to do that. And we have a lot of initiatives, agriculture, tech, these kind of initiatives should continue and to reinforced.
Ambassador Zhao.
I think that that's an example of the Pacific Islands countries, their sentiments, their experience with the United States are not necessarily very positive. After all, the U.S. has not taken Pacific Island countries very seriously.
Sorry to interrupt, but why was that? Was it because of the cultural difference, in a sense that United States want to see democracy being, implemented or becomes a norm in in that region?
May I provide a historical perspective that I think the Pacific Islands, these words are not necessarily standing for some good memory for most American public, because during World War II, they lost a lot of American soldiers in the Pacific. Okay. For example, Belarus of the Palau, and also the Guadalcanal of the Solomon Islands, let alone the Iwo Jima. Those battles, they have killed a lot of Americans. So during the World War II, one American military general used these words to describe Pacific Island countries. They say, the forgotten corner of hell. They used to say that. So it's kind of not very pay much attention to that part of the world.
All right. Reuters cited sources indicating that China may conduct their joint SWORD 2024 sea military exercise around the time of Lai Ching-te's visit to the Pacific Island nations, which concludes on December 6th. The reported objective of this exercise is to assert authority and draw boundaries ahead of Donald Trump's inauguration. So what impact might such military drill have on Taiwan and its diplomatic allies, Jasmine?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I think the timing is really important, especially we're seeing the new administrations of U.S. So I think this drills also, it's an act to test the red line of U.S. and how U.S. is going to react on the drill. And so I think our allies, not only our diplomatic allies, but also our strategic allies, especially for the regional strategic allies. For example, Japan, Philippines, they are all going to closely watching how U.S. is going to react on this issue. Especially, we're not sure how Donald Trump he is like prioritizing his agenda in the future. We're expecting that he will be prioritize Russian-Ukraine war and the war in the Middle East. But how about the allies? His relations with the allies. So I think this will be a very important signal, and we will all the allies of Taiwan will closely watching.
Okay, let's now turn to other recent developments. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin visited Fiji and announced the launch of negotiations for status of forces agreements, so-called SOFA, between the two nations, marking a significant step toward strengthening military cooperation. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping held a high-level meeting in Beijing with the Prime Minister of Samoa, emphasizing China's commitment to the Pacific Island nation. So the U.S. and China are continuing efforts to win support from countries in the Pacific region. My question for Ambassador Zhao is that RFI, the media, highlighted that this marked the first visit by a U.S. Secretary of Defense to Fiji. So why was this timing chosen in your perspective?
Well, relatively speaking, among the Pacific Island countries, I think the United States will choose Fiji Island to be the most available, most accessible, or maybe one of the closest, allied country to the United States in the Pacific region. Because first, Fiji, the U.S. has an embassy in Fiji Island, which provides a consular and passport visa service to the other neighboring country like Tuvalu or Eddie. So Fiji stands for number one priority and number one accessible partner to the United States in the Pacific region. And secondly, the leadership of Fiji are normally kind of not necessarily pro-China. For instance, in the last September, during the UN conference, the Prime Minister of Fiji, if I pronounce his name, is Katoni Vele. Katoni Vele is a long name. He publicly condemned China, for firing that, intercontinental ballistic missiles in the last September. So the PM of Fiji Island said that, please respect our region, respect our right. We don't like to see some missile flying over our heads. So that indicates the very interesting relationship between Fiji and China. So that's the moment. Here is where the U.S. thought we could kind of step in, could take advantage of this anti-China or China uncomfortable situation to do something for American interest. So that's why Fiji was chosen. Yeah.
In addition to Ambassador Zhao's notion, Jasmine, Fiji's location between the second and third island chains and its role as Australia's gateway to the Pacific. So you have any comments on his explanation?
Yes, I also wanted to mention one thing that why Fiji is so important is also China is now exploiting its seabed mining. And there's also a lot of illegal logging in the region. So I think these are all very concerning. So so we can understand why there is a geopolitical reason why U.S. need to strengthen its relations with Fiji for its interest. But I also wanted to mention that Fiji and a lot of this island country, their democratic system is not that stable. There's a lot of corruption issue. And so when U.S. when U.S. is having their presence there, they are also thinking how should they position themselves over there. And of course, they wanted to compete with the influence with China within the region. But this kind of competition cannot be merely competing how much I'm going to invest. We need to provide not only we need to provide other alternatives, we also need to let our allies, including Fiji's, to understand why U.S. and why democratic values is better, and helping them to transform into more mature democracy.
Although whether accepting it or not is a different story because of the cultural background. But according to Reuters, the status of forces agreements that the U.S. and Fiji are discussing would allow the U.S. to deploy and mobilize forces to support Fiji. Additionally, the U.S. would provide $4.9 million to assist Fiji in modernizing its military. So how should we interpret the political implication behind these developments, Ambassador?
Well, if I may say a few words on the U.S. Traditional strategy in trying to exporting their so-called democratic values to the other so-called third world countries, because the U.S. has done so. Given my time in experience in Washington D.C., I've noticed that the Americans are pretty much on that kind of a thing. Pretty much on the top of the agenda. But over the past few decades, have not been very successful. I think quite a few examples in Africa, in Middle East, now in the Pacific Island, let alone that in Latin America. So I think the U.S. U.S. approach to those Pacific Island countries, including Fiji, still pretty much on the merits of their national interests, security interests, and geopolitical interests. That's what they have in mind in the U.S. Leadership's concept. But however, I would like to point out that for those island countries, they have one thing not so very convincing, because so far, until this moment, that there's any sitting American president has ever visited any Pacific Island countries so far, let alone that Xi Jinping has paid a visit to several countries several times. So now the Defense Secretary Austin, his visit will turn out to be very important, very significant. So I think if Donald Trump, President-elect, I think he should be briefed, should be advised by his staff for the future. If U.S. want to secure their stronghold in the Pacific Island, to stop from this island gradually will be occupied, put it this way, by China. So China has been promoting the expansion throughout the Pacific region. So I think U.S., if they really take seriously concern about that, they should do something, because I think the high-level visit might be a way worth their trying.
Okay, Jasmine, Fiji's Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka is known for his pro-Western stance. Visited China in August this year. He met with Xi Jinping and agreed to maintain Fiji's police cooperation agreement with China. So now he's strengthening military cooperation with the U.S. So how should we interpret Rabuka's strategy amidst this latest round of U.S.-China rivalry?
Yeah, it reminds me the strategy very pretty much similar to the Southeast Asians, like hedging. They are more relying on security, relying on U.S. for security, and relying on China for development and their economy issues. So I would say this is the main problem that U.S. has been facing around the world. As Ambassador Chow mentioned, U.S. has this kind of, you can say, naive or this kind of very optimistic vision to disseminate democracy. I also think it's a really good vision, but at the same time, as you mentioned, the cultural differences is really hard to push forward. And so I think the economic. So there's a lot of countries they will be using this hedging strategy to count on U.S. for security and counting on China for developments. But I think now we're coming to, the world is changing right now. The supply chain are reshaping. And so I think it is also the time to let our allies and let those countries to understand you sometimes need to make a decision. And you cannot take advantage of everything at the same time.
The Australian think tank Lowy Institute reported that China has surpassed the U.S. to become the second largest donor to the Pacific Island nations. Moreover, China has shifted from its previous checkbook diplomacy approach, reducing individual funding from around 40 million to 5 million, and concentrated its resources on a select few Pacific Island nations with strong ties. So how should we interpret the effectiveness and implications of this more targeted strategy by China, Ambassador?
Yeah, well, as we all know very well, that China has been suffering from some economic downturn, at home. So they have to come up with some real adjustment of their resource allocation. So they should. So I think it goes without saying. It's very natural. They have to be selective in helping or financing those the third countries, and not only for Pacific Island region, but also in Africa. In some of the country in the Middle East, China is trying to come up with more effective and more cost saving, or some more strategically strategically effective way of choosing the country to be funded by China. How successful it's going to be, we don't know yet, because I think China, given the limited financial resources today, they have to come up with a bet to choose, because the Belt and Road Initiative has suffered some negative impact from a certain country. So China is forced to reevaluate, to relocate those limited resource for those those foreign countries, and but we have to make sure that the development is not necessarily will serve the expectation of China, because speaking of the Australian think tank, Lowy, Lowy is always a little pro-China relatively, and so this analysis that still remains to be seen. How successful, or how I think maybe China is kind of a trial and error to see how it works. If it suffers some negative repercussion, they're going to. That's right. They're going to.
So what about you, Josephine? Is the checkbook diplomacy not anymore China's approach to deal with the regions, nations in this region?
Yeah, actually, one thing to highlight here that, for example, in Southeast Asia, actually, a U.S. player he invests more than China. Its foreign investment is actually exceeding China. But when you talk to people, asking them like how much when it comes to developments, the first thing that people think of is still China. And that's probably because of the propaganda China has been doing. So I think it's really important, especially as Ambassador Chow mentioned, that China is also suffering the internal economic pressure. So I think they now they will continue using this propaganda to highlight how important they are for this development in the economic financing. But I will say that U.S. also need to do more on that, especially U.S. actually has been investing a lot in those regions. And so I think this is something that the Western countries, and especially Taiwan as well, Taiwan has a lot of investment in the Pacific region. For example, we mentioned about Fiji. We have an agriculture and tech initiatives in Nadi. So I think these are all things we have to continue to tell the people over there that how important are these Western and democratic allies.
The very last question for the Ambassador, brief answer, please, is that Xi Jinping actually met with Samoan Prime Minister Fiami Naomi Meta'afa, right? And Meta'afa previously told Reuters that there's a plan to cancel China's $1 million in the Vyasu Bay Port Development Project, marking a setback for China's Belt and Road Initiative. So how will we evaluate this instance?
As I was saying earlier, that China is being forced to reevaluate, to rearrange to remanage their Belt and Road Initiative (BRI) because of the limited financial resources at home. But now I think China has definitely done some research to see kind of the pros and cons of doing some change for a certain country. So I'd like to maybe before the end of this program, I'd like to give a humble advice to President-elect Trump, that Trump, since now he has been kind of in high profile, announcing the custom and tariffs increase for most allied countries in the world. So that has stirred up some animosity or some threat or fear from a certain country around the world. That will, if Trump is go ahead to do that, what he announced to do during the campaign time, that will certainly leave some room for Chinese maneuvering in the future. They will kind of step into those countries which have suffered from a new American policy for support. Like Trump is going to threat threat and threat instead of help. That will leave some room for Chinese maneuvering in many respects.
Jasmine, finally, you think that Trump will shift his attention to the Pacific Island nations?
I think it's very unlikely. Trump doesn't really cares about those smaller countries. So my personal view is that to keep those countries to be handled by the State Department. I think especially for the first 2 years of the Trump's term, he will focus on the domestic issue, especially the immigration issue, and also for foreign affairs, he will focus on the Ukraine and the war in the Middle East. So I think it's actually good to leave those places to the State Department and let the State Departments to handle that, because I don't think Mr. Trump, he cares about those countries, and I don't think he really cares about democratic values.
Okay, Ambassador Zhao and Jasmine, thank you for great insights in the show.
All right, thank you.
Taiwan's Pacific allies are under constant pressure from the Chinese Communist Party to break ties with Taiwan. With only 3 allies remaining in the region, Taiwan's president must work harder than ever to keep diplomatic relationship alive. Like our show, subscribe to Taiwan Talks. See you soon.
The White House has announced a $50 billion,
$20 billion US dollars
for semiconductor.
TSMC's come out of the 2022 CHIPS Act.
I want competition with China, not conflict.
Taiwan punches above its weight when it comes to creating chips.
The entire world has great interest in keeping Taiwan's chip industry functional.
So the silicon shield that supposedly has been protecting Taiwan, is there a silicon shield?
We take an exclusive look inside one of the 7 chip design firms picked to make India a semiconductor giant.
How many years the TSMC can still maintain its competitive edge?
People here in Japan are calling it the TSMC shock.
Why is Japan so eager to restore its past glory?
What do you see as the next big shift in the semiconductor industry?
Taiwan's take on global headlines. All that matters, Taiwan Plus.